time is literally running out, and I don't want to be a prophet of doom by any means, because I'm very confident that we can play our part and we can deliver and do this if we pull together. But it's going to need a kind of emergency approach.
So what do you see as some of the fastest growing markets around the globe at the moment?
So we think Europe will continue to grow, and in fact will go into a kind of more accelerated growth period because of the policy momentum. And we see Asia continuing to pick up pace. China is already the biggest single national market, and we expect other places in Asia to grow and continue to grow. As we've seen, Taiwan has become a very dynamic market. We're expecting the Japanese market to get off the ground, Korea, and also some less well-known ones like Vietnam, which has huge potential. So I think it's Europe, it's East Asia, it's also the US, which is taking off. And then I think there's a whole series of less well-known markets where they are seriously looking at doing offshore wind. And we've seen that through our engagement with government over the last year.
And you talked about some of the challenges the sector's facing, particularly around the relentless pressure on price and costs. And I think your words were, in the next 10 years, we have a lot of work to do. What's on that list?
Well, first of all, the expectation from the policy point of view is that we go from what's still a relatively small industry, even though it's already sizable and mature, into an extremely sizable global industry. At the moment, the industry is as we know, started off in Europe. It's reached a kind of level of maturity in Europe. It's reached a level of price competitiveness that makes it one of the most competitive kind of large-scale energy sources in the world. But now it really needs to go global, and we're talking about going to something like maybe a terawatt of power by 2050, according to the expectations of the big international organizations like the IEA and IRENA and the World Bank and other people. So we're talking about a massive ramping up. So I think for the next 10 years, we'll see quite a large increase, but then we need to put everything into place in these 10 years so that we can have a much more kind of exponential ramping up between 2030 and 2050. And really, our responsibility as an industry and our opportunity is huge, because the world is literally relying on offshore wind as being one of the main kind of building blocks to meeting the climate targets.
And so when you talk about ramping up and making it happen, what needs to happen for that to happen?
So I think the main, starting from the top, the main thing is policy. There need to be national and regional policies in place to enable the pipeline of projects to build up faster and to get to construction faster. So just to give an example, the UK, which has been one of the most successful offshore wind markets in the world, the most successful offshore wind market in the world. It took fully 10 years between signing the leases for the round 3 areas with the Crown Estate and those projects going into construction sort of now and having their CFD and going into construction. Now, that's 10 years. If we're going to go to the kind of ramping up that we are kind of foreseeing and that the international organizations are expecting, that needs to go faster. And the question at the moment, I think it's interesting, if you're in this industry at the moment compared to kind of 5 or 10 years ago. When I first started looking at offshore wind, people used to say there wasn't enough money, and how do you convince investors to get into offshore wind? And now, in fact, there's plenty of money, and there's plenty of people who'd like to come into offshore wind, and we're talking about financial investors, we're talking about large oil and gas companies. There's lots and lots of players who are trying to come into the market. There's simply not enough projects, because the whole development of the project pipeline, I'm talking about bankable projects with contracts, is not going fast enough.
Mm. You mentioned also COP26. What are your expectations for COP26? What does it need to deliver?
Well, so the process at the moment is first of all, delivering on the Paris Agreement, and secondly, speeding up and enhancing the targets to bring them into line with the IPCC report 2018, which basically said we need to limit temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. And it's about bringing the targets in line with that, and it's about seeing whether implementation is in line with that. Now, some of that was supposed to happen in Madrid at the end of last year, and not very much happened, to be honest. And the discussion was a bit diverted into a kind of rather fruitless discussion around old expired carbon credits, and not much was achieved. So the expectation on COP26 in Glasgow is that a lot needs to be agreed in order to get the world on anything like a kind of pathway that can guarantee us to limit temperature rise to 1.5 centigrade. And there's quite a lot of agreement that needs to be made amongst the leading countries, and bringing all the smaller ones into line. So we're talking really about getting pledges of what they call net zero from most of the big countries. And we're very, very far from that. And then we're talking about implementation and about actually having plans that will ensure that we do meet those targets.
It's a tough ask, all right, isn't it?
It's a tough ask, but it needs to happen. Time is literally running out, and I don't want to be a prophet of doom by any means, because I'm very confident that we can play our part and we can deliver and do this if we pull together. But it's going to need a kind of emergency approach. It's going to need high-level policy support. It's going to need renewable energy and climate kind of SARs or committees at the highest level with prime ministerial or presidential backing to actually make this happen. I mean, we're really in an emergency now, and we need to move quickly. So I don't want to be alarmist, and the same point has been made at the UN, has been made to lots of people. But what we need to do now is just get our heads down and work together with government and other stakeholders, and put into place what needs to be put into place so that we can then go through this transition. And that kind of needs to happen in the next 10 years and get us on the right path. And in 2030, 2040, 2050, we'll be growing at this much faster rate.